6-year-old Emma had been starved of a mother's love for so long that she had become afraid to get close to anyone. Her small world had turned gray and cold after losing the most important person in her life. Every night, she would clutch her worn teddy bear, whispering to it the words she wished she could say to her mother one more time. Emma lived with her father, David, who worked tirelessly to provide for them both. Though he loved his daughter deeply, he struggled to fill the enormous void left by his wife's absence. He watched helplessly as Emma became more withdrawn each day, building invisible walls around her heart to protect herself from further pain. The little girl who once laughed freely and ran through meadows now moved through life like a shadow. She had learned that loving someone meant risking the unbearable pain of losing them, so she chose isolation over connection. At school, teachers noticed how she sat alone during lunch, declined invitations to play, and flinched whenever someone tried to offer comfort. But what Emma didn't know was that in just a few hours, a magical embrace with Elvis would melt her frozen heart, move 25,000 people to tears, and give her exactly what she needed most in life: unconditional love. The Memphis auditorium buzzed with electric anticipation as thousands of Elvis fans gathered for what promised to be an unforgettable evening. The air was thick with excitement, perfume, and the collective energy of people who had traveled from across the country to witness the king of rock and roll perform live. Outside, vendors sold Elvis memorabilia, t-shirts, and photographs, while fans shared stories of previous concerts and their deep connection to the legendary performer. David had surprised Emma with tickets to the concert, hoping that music might somehow reach the parts of his daughter's heart that remained locked away. The tickets had cost him a significant portion of his monthly salary, but he remembered how Emma used to dance around their living room when her mother played Elvis records, her tiny feet moving to the rhythm while her mother clapped and sang along. Sarah had been an enormous Elvis fan, owning every album and knowing every lyric by heart. She would often tell Emma stories about how Elvis's music made people feel less alone in the world, how his voice could heal broken hearts and bring hope to those who had lost their way. The drive to the concert had been mostly silent, with Emma staring out the window at the passing lights of Memphis while clutching Mr. Buttons to her chest. David had attempted conversation several times, pointing out landmarks and trying to gauge his daughter's interest level, but Emma remained largely unresponsive. He could see her reflection in the passenger window, a small, pale face with eyes that seemed far too old for someone who had barely started first grade. As they found their seats in the middle section, Emma remained characteristically quiet. She observed the crowd with wide, cautious eyes, taking in the elaborate hairstyles, sparkling outfits, and animated conversations surrounding them. People were laughing, sharing stories of previous Elvis concerts, and displaying their homemade signs with declarations of love for their idol. Women wore their finest dresses and jewelry, while men donned their best suits, all prepared to witness what many considered a religious experience rather than simply a musical performance. The atmosphere was unlike anything Emma had ever experienced. Thousands of people filled every seat, and the energy was palpable, a mixture of excitement, anticipation, and pure joy that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the building. Ushers moved through the aisles, helping people find their seats, while vendors called out refreshments and souvenirs. The conversations around them were animated, filled with predictions about which songs Elvis might perform and memories of his previous shows. "Look at all these happy people, sweetheart," David said gently, hoping to coax some enthusiasm from his daughter. Emma nodded politely but kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her teddy bear pressed against her chest like a shield. She seemed overwhelmed by the sheer number of people and the volume of their collective excitement, shrinking slightly in her seat as if trying to make herself invisible, signs with declarations of love for their idol. "Look at all these happy people, sweetheart," David said gently, hoping to coax some enthusiasm from his daughter. Emma nodded politely but kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her teddy bear pressed against her chest like a shield. revealed. The stage lights dimmed, and a collective gasp rose from the audience. Somewhere in the darkness, musicians began tuning their instruments, creating a symphony of anticipation that made every heart in the venue beat faster. Emma found herself leaning forward slightly, despite her emotional barriers, drawn by an inexplicable pull toward the stage. When Elvis Presley stepped into the spotlight, the entire auditorium erupted into thunderous applause and screams of adoration. He wore his iconic white jumpsuit adorned with intricate beading that caught the stage lights like stars against the night sky. His presence was magnetic, commanding the attention of every single person in the venue with an effortless charisma that seemed to fill every corner of the massive space. "Good evening, Memphis," Elvis called out, his voice smooth as velvet and warm as summer honey. The crowd roared back their greeting, a wall of sound that vibrated through Emma's small body. For the first time in months, she felt something stir inside her chest. Not quite excitement, but curiosity. Elvis began with one of his classic numbers, his hips swaying to the rhythm as his voice soared through the auditorium. The backup singers provided perfect harmony, while the band laid down a foundation of pure musical magic. People throughout the audience began dancing in their seats, swaying to the music, and singing along with every word. Emma watched, mesmerized by the way Elvis moved across the stage with such confidence and joy. There was something about his smile, genuine and warm, that reminded her of feelings she thought she had forgotten. Her father noticed the subtle change in his daughter's posture as she sat up straighter, her grip on the teddy bear loosening slightly. As Elvis continued his performance, he had a habit that made him beloved by fans worldwide. He would scan the audience, making eye contact with individuals, blowing kisses, and sometimes pointing directly at specific people. It was this personal connection that transformed his concerts from mere performances into intimate experiences shared with thousands. Midway through his third song, Elvis's gaze swept across the middle section where Emma and her father were seated. His eyes, trained by years of performing to read crowds and connect with individual souls, stopped when they found the small girl clutching her teddy bear. In that instant, Elvis saw something that touched his heart deeply. While everyone around Emma was caught up in the joy and excitement of the moment, she sat perfectly still, her large eyes reflecting a sadness that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Her teddy bear was obviously well loved, with patches where the fur had been worn away by countless hours of hugging and tears. Elvis had always possessed an intuitive understanding of human emotion, particularly when it came to children. His own childhood experiences had given him a sensitivity to recognize when a young soul was hurting. As he continued singing, part of his attention remained focused on Emma, noting how she seemed isolated even while surrounded by thousands of people. The song came to an end, and Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, closer to where Emma was sitting. He could see more clearly now the way she held herself protectively, the careful distance she maintained from her father despite his obvious love and concern, and most tellingly, the expression of someone who had learned not to hope for too much from life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice carrying easily through the sound system, "before we continue, I want to share something with you. Music has the power to heal, to bring us together, and to remind us that we're all connected by love." The audience listened intently, sensing that something special was about to happen. Elvis continued, "Sometimes, in a crowd of thousands, you notice one person who needs a little extra love. And tonight, I see a beautiful little girl who might just need to know that she's not alone in this world." Elvis's words rippled through the audience like gentle waves, creating a hush of anticipation mixed with curiosity. Many people began looking around, wondering who he was referring to, while others simply waited to see what their beloved performer would do next. "Honey," Elvis said, his voice now softer, more intimate despite the microphone amplification. "Little lady in the blue dress with the teddy bear, would you like to come up here and meet me?" Emma's entire body went rigid with shock. She looked around, certain that Elvis couldn't possibly be talking to her. The spotlight operator, following Elvis's gesture, found her in the crowd, and suddenly Emma was bathed in warm, golden light, while thousands Thousands of pairs of eyes turned in her direction. "It's okay, sweetheart," Elvis encouraged, his voice filled with the kind of gentle warmth that could melt the coldest heart. "I just want to say hello. Would you like that?" David felt his daughter's hand slip into his, trembling like a frightened bird. He leaned down to whisper, "It's up to you, Emma. But I think he really wants to meet you." His voice carried hope and encouragement, but no pressure. He had learned to let Emma make her own choices about emotional risks. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Emma sat frozen between fear and longing. The part of her that had learned to protect herself screamed warnings about getting too close, about hoping for something that might disappoint her. But there was another part, a tiny flame that had been buried but never completely extinguished, that whispered about possibilities and love and the magic that might happen if she was brave enough to try. The audience waited in collective silence, sensing the profound importance of this moment. Some people were already reaching for tissues, intuiting that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Emma's decision came not as a dramatic moment of revelation, but as a quiet letting go. She stood up slowly, still clutching her teddy bear, and took her father's hand. Together, they made their way down the aisle toward the stage, with security personnel and venue staff gently guiding them through the crowd. As they walked, the audience began to applaud, not the wild, exciting applause of a concert, but something softer, more supportive. It was the kind of applause that says, "We're with you, and you're safe here." Emma could feel the warmth of their encouragement surrounding her like a protective blanket. Elvis watched their progress with a gentle smile, occasionally speaking into the microphone to maintain the connection. "That's right, honey. Take your time. There's no rush at all." His words were like stepping stones, giving Emma something solid to focus on as she navigated this unprecedented situation. When they reached the stage, staff members helped Emma up the steps. Her legs felt shaky, and her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. But Elvis was there, kneeling down to her level, his famous face kind and patient as he waited for her to feel comfortable. "Hi there," he said simply, his voice now gentle and conversational rather than performative. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Emma, Emma," Elvis repeated, as if tasting the name and finding it beautiful. "That's a lovely name. And who's this?" He gestured to the teddy bear. "Mr. Buttons," Emma replied, her voice slightly stronger now. "Mr. Buttons looks like he's been a very good friend to you," Elvis observed, and Emma nodded solemnly. What happened next was witnessed by 25,000 people, but it felt as intimate as a conversation between a loving uncle and his beloved niece. Elvis had a gift for creating bubbles of privacy, even in the most public settings, making the person he was speaking with feel like they were the only one in the room, only ones who mattered in that moment. "Emma," Elvis said, still kneeling so they were eye to eye, "I bet you and Mr. Buttons have been through some tough times together." Emma nodded, her grip on the teddy bear tightening slightly. "He helps me when I miss Mommy," she whispered, and the words carried through the microphone to every corner of the auditorium. A collective intake of breath swept through the audience. Many people felt their hearts clench with sympathy and understanding. In the crowd, mothers held their children a little closer, and fathers blinked back unexpected tears. "Your mommy's not with you anymore?" Elvis asked gently, and Emma shook her head. "I bet she loved you very, very much." "She did," Emma confirmed, and for the first time her voice carried a note of certainty and pride rather than just sadness. "You know what I think?" Elvis said, reaching out slowly to touch Mr. Buttons' worn ear. "I think your mommy is still loving you, even though you can't see her. Love like that doesn't just disappear. It stays right here." He placed his hand gently over his heart, then over Emma's. "But it hurts," Emma said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Oh, honey," Elvis replied, his voice thick with compassion. "It does hurt. Missing someone we love is one of the hardest things in the world. But you know what else love does? It connects us to other people who want to care about us." As Elvis spoke, something began to shift in Emma's demeanor. The rigid posture that had protected her for months started to relax slightly. Her shoulders dropped from their defensive position, and she took a step closer to Elvis without realizing it. "Emma," Elvis continued, "would it be okay if I gave you a hug? Sometimes hugs help carry love from one person to another." The question hung in the air, like a bridge between Emma's old world of protective isolation and a new possibility of connection. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath, 25,000 people collectively hoping for this small girl's healing. Emma looked at Elvis's face, really looked at it, searching for any sign of the disappointment or abandonment she had learned to expect. Instead, she saw only kindness, patience, and a genuine desire to comfort her. His eyes held the same warmth she remembered from her mother's eyes, not trying to replace what she had lost, but offering something new and precious. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emma nodded. Elvis smiled, not his famous stage smile, but something softer and more personal, and opened his arms. "Come here, sweetheart." What happened next would be replayed in the memories of everyone present for the rest of their lives. Emma stepped forward and allowed herself to be enveloped in Elvis's embrace. At first, she remained stiff and uncertain, but as his arms closed around her with gentle security, she began to melt. The hug began as a simple gesture of comfort, but it quickly became something transformative. Elvis held Emma with the practiced tenderness of someone who understood that some hearts needed extra care to heal. He didn't rush the moment or try to make it into a performance. He simply held this hurting child and let her feel safe. His arms created a sanctuary where grief could be acknowledged without shame, where vulnerability was met with strength, and where love was offered freely without conditions or expectations. For Emma, the embrace awakened sensations she thought she had lost forever. The feeling of strong, protective arms around her brought back sense memories of her mother's hugs, not in a way that made her sad, but in a way that reminded her that love was still possible in her world. She could smell Elvis's cologne mixed with the faint scent of stage makeup and the leather of his jumpsuit, creating a unique sensory memory that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The warmth of human contact after months of emotional isolation was overwhelming. Emma had forgotten what it felt like to be held without reservation, to be embraced by someone who asked nothing in return except the privilege of offering comfort. Elvis's heartbeat was steady against her ear, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her own until she felt as if they were sharing the same life force, the same determination to overcome pain and find joy again. As the seconds passed, Emma's rigid posture completely dissolved. She dropped Mr. Buttons and wrapped her small arms around Elvis's neck, burying her face against his shoulder. The dam that had held back months of suppressed emotion finally broke, and she began to cry. Not the silent, careful tears she had learned to shed in private, but the releasing sobs of a child who finally felt safe enough to let her guard down. The sound of her crying carried through the auditorium, but it wasn't the desperate weeping of despair. It was the cleansing rain that comes after a long drought, washing away the accumulated dust of grief and making space for new growth. Each sob seemed to carry away a piece of the burden she had been carrying alone, until her tears became less about loss and more about relief. Elvis continued to hold her, occasionally murmuring soft words of comfort. "It's okay, honey. Let it out. You're safe now. You're going to be okay." His voice was a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions, reminding her that she was not alone, that someone strong and caring was there to catch her if she fell. The repetition of his reassurances created a rhythm that gradually slowed her breathing and calmed her racing heart. The audience watched in complete silence, many of them wiping away their own tears. This wasn't entertainment. It was witnessing a moment of pure human connection and healing. Grown men who had come to hear rock and roll found themselves crying for a little girl they had never met. Mothers in the audience felt their hearts breaking and mending simultaneously as Emma's sobs gradually subsided into quieter tears. The sound of sniffling and gentle weeping could be heard throughout the auditorium. What had started as one little girl's moment of emotional release had become a collective experience of compassion and healing. In the crowd, David watched his daughter with tears streaming down his face. For months, he had felt helpless in the face of Emma's grief, unable to reach the parts of her that had shut down after her mother's death. Now, he was witnessing his little girl's heart beginning to open again, and the relief was overwhelming. Elvis continued to hold Emma, letting her take all the time she needed. He had performed for presidents and dignitaries, but he understood that this moment was perhaps perhaps the most important performance of his career, not as an entertainer, but as a human being offering comfort to another human being in need. "Feel better?" he asked softly when Emma's tears began to slow. Emma pulled back slightly to look at him, her face flushed but somehow brighter than it had been in months. She nodded, managing a small smile, the first genuine smile David had seen from his daughter since her mother's death. "Good," Elvis said, reaching down to pick up Mr. Buttons and hand him back to Emma. "I think Mr. Buttons was worried about you for a minute there." Emma giggled, an actual giggle, and hugged her teddy bear before looking back at Elvis. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Emma," Elvis replied. "You reminded me why music and love are the most important things in the world." With Emma still in his arms, Elvis stood and faced the audience. The sight of the legendary performer holding the small girl created a tableau that would be remembered as one of the most touching moments in concert history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice carrying easily through the sound system, "this is Emma, and she's just reminded us all that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we're not alone, that there are people who care about us, and that it's okay to let people love us." The audience erupted in applause, not the wild cheering of fans, but the warm, sustained applause of people who had witnessed something sacred. Many people were still crying, but they were tears of joy and recognition of the beautiful humanity they had just observed. Elvis looked down at Emma, who was taking in the sight of thousands of people applauding for her. "They're clapping for you, sweetheart. All these people want you to know that you're special and loved." Emma looked out at the sea of faces, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid of their attention. Instead, she felt embraced by a community of strangers who had become connected through compassion. "Would you like to stay up here with me for one song?" Elvis asked. "I promise it will be a happy one." Emma nodded eagerly, and Elvis set her down beside him, keeping one protective hand on her shoulder. Elvis turned to his band and said, "Boys, let's play Love Me Tender," for Emma and everyone else who needs to be reminded that they're loved. As the gentle melody began, Elvis's voice took on an even softer quality than usual. He wasn't performing the song, he was sharing it, offering it as a gift to a little girl and to everyone in the audience who had ever felt alone or forgotten. Emma stood beside Elvis throughout the song, sometimes swaying to the music, sometimes just listening with wonder. The audience sang along quietly, their voices creating a harmony of support and love that filled the entire venue. During the instrumental break, Elvis knelt down to Emma again. "You know what I want you to remember, sweetheart." "What?" Emma asked. "Every time you hear music, any music, I want you to remember that you're loved by your daddy, by your mommy who's watching over you, and by all the people in the world who believe that love is stronger than sadness. Can you remember that?" Emma nodded solemnly, understanding that she was being entrusted with something important. As the song drew to a close, Elvis picked Emma up one more time. "Are you ready to go back to your daddy now? Can I hug you again first?" Emma asked. "Of course, honey. Anytime you need a hug, you just remember this one, okay?" Their second embrace was different from the first, less about releasing pain and more about sealing in love and hope. When they separated, Emma was smiling widely, her eyes bright with life in a way they hadn't been since before her mother's death. Elvis walked Emma to the edge of the stage, where her father was waiting with tears of gratitude streaming down his face. As he handed Emma down to David, Elvis said, "You take good care of this special little lady. She's got a big heart and a lot of love to give." "Thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me my daughter back." Elvis smiled and ruffled Emma's hair one last time. "You keep being brave, Emma. The world needs more people like you." As Emma and her father made their way back to their seats, the audience gave them another standing ovation. But this time, Emma didn't shrink away from the attention. Instead, she waved at people, smiled at their encouraging words, and held her head high. Elvis completed his concert with renewed energy, but the evening's most memorable moment had already occurred. Throughout the remaining songs, he would occasionally glance toward Emma's section of the audience, smiling when he saw her dancing with her father or singing along with the music. During "Can't Help Falling in Love," Elvis dedicated the song to everyone who has found the courage to love again, his eyes finding Emma in the crowd. She stood on her chair, swaying swaying to the music with her arms raised high, Mr. Buttons tucked safely under one arm. The transformation was remarkable. Where once sat a withdrawn, frightened child, now danced a little girl rediscovering joy. The band members, who had witnessed countless concerts over the years, later said that something special happened to the music itself that night. Every note seemed to carry more meaning. Every rhythm pulsed with greater life, as if Elvis's act of compassion had infused the entire performance with healing energy. When the concert ended and the lights came up, dozens of audience members approached Emma and her father to share their own stories of loss, healing, and hope. Emma found herself surrounded by strangers who felt like friends, all of them connected by the shared experience of witnessing and participating in something beautiful. An elderly woman approached with tears in her eyes, explaining how she had lost her husband 6 months earlier and had been struggling to find meaning in life. "Watching you tonight reminded me that love continues," she told Emma. "Your mother's love lives on in you, and now it's touched all of us." A teenager who had been adopted after spending years in foster care shyly asked for Emma's autograph, explaining that seeing her courage on stage had inspired him to audition for his school's talent show. "If you can be brave in front of 25,000 people," he said, "maybe I can be brave in front of my classmates." "Daddy," Emma said as they walked to their car, "I think Mommy would have liked that concert." "I think she would have loved it, sweetheart," David replied. "And I think she would be so proud of how brave you were tonight." "I didn't feel scared when Elvis was hugging me," Emma said thoughtfully. "I felt like maybe it's okay to love people again." David stopped walking and knelt down to his daughter's level, much as Elvis had done earlier. "Emma, loving people is always okay. It's what makes life worth living. Your mommy taught me that, and tonight, Elvis helped remind you of it." In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Emma's encounter with Elvis spread far beyond those who had witnessed it firsthand. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon it was being shared across the country as an example of the healing power of human compassion. Emma kept the memory of that night close to her heart, just as Elvis had instructed. Whenever sadness threatened to overwhelm her again, she would close her eyes and remember the feeling of being held safely, of being surrounded by love, and of discovering that her heart was strong enough to love again without forgetting what she had lost. She began to open up more at school, making friends and participating in activities. Her teachers noticed the change immediately. The withdrawn, careful child had been replaced by someone who was still thoughtful and sometimes sad, but who was also capable of joy and connection. David watched his daughter's gradual healing with profound gratitude. The night of the concert had been a turning point, not just for Emma, but for their entire family. He had learned that sometimes healing comes not from trying to fix everything yourself, but from being open to the kindness of others. Years later, when Emma was grown and had children of her own, she would still tell the story of the night. Elvis Presley taught her that love was stronger than loss. She would describe the feeling of being held by someone who understood that healing happens not by forgetting pain, but by discovering that the heart has room for both sorrow and joy. The 25,000 people who witnessed Emma's moment with Elvis carried the memory with them as a reminder of the power of compassion. Many of them made different choices in their own lives because of what they had seen. They were kinder to strangers, more patient with their children, and more willing to reach out to those who seemed to be hurting. Elvis himself was changed by the encounter. He had always been generous with his fans, but Emma reminded him that sometimes the most important gift he could offer wasn't his music, but simply his presence and care for another human being. In interviews afterward, he would often speak about the responsibility that comes with fame, not just to entertain, but to uplift and heal when possible. Emma's story became more than just a touching moment at a concert. It became a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the transformative power of love. It reminded everyone who heard it that healing is possible, that we are not meant to carry our sorrows alone, and that sometimes the most profound moments of connection happen between strangers who recognize each other's humanity. The little girl who had been afraid to love again had learned that love doesn't
doesn't make us weak or vulnerable. It makes us brave enough to keep living, to keep hoping, and to keep opening our hearts to the beautiful possibilities that exist in every moment. In the end, Emma's embrace with Elvis lasted only a few minutes, but its impact echoed through decades, touching countless lives and reminding the world that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply hold someone who needs to be held and remind them that they are loved. The magic of that night wasn't just in the music or the celebrity. It was in the recognition that every human being deserves compassion, that every child deserves to feel safe and loved, and that healing happens when we have the courage to reach out to each other across the distances that separate us. Emma had found her way back to love, and in doing so, she had shown 25,000 other people the path as well.